The 493rd edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome in to another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. Coming at you live on a Thursday night. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony, we're back with you guys once again. And you know, if we're coming to you live during the middle of the week, it must be important. It must be a big game. And that's exactly what the case is. As the greatest rivalry in sports, the Duke-Carolina rivalry will renew itself on Saturday night. It'll be the first of two matchups between the two schools. It'll come your way 6:30 p.m. over on ESPN, and we're here to get you ready for the game. We'll break down Duke. We'll take a look at the latest trends in the rivalry. Look at the game from Carolina's perspective. Talk about the feeling around the rivalry and how it feels like a game similar to where we are 4 years ago, and so much more. But we start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. And this one's very simple. It's always the same message when Carolina and Duke get together, especially in the first matchup. And it's simply, go to hell, Duke. Words that as Carolina fans that we live by, and words that really a lot of people live by if they hate Duke basketball, and a lot of people do hate Duke basketball. And that sentiment will be on the surface on Saturday night, because Carolina needs this win in the worst way. You always want to win the rivalry matchup for what it means, the emotions, the bragging rights that go into it. But when you are where Carolina is, which is a 13-9 team and a team that's squarely on the bubble, a win over Duke would go a long way towards becoming an NCAA tournament team. So this game has a lot more on the line for Carolina than it typically does when they meet in February. So with that, we'll go ahead and get right into the preview edition of the pod. We'll set the scene for the greatest rivalry in sports. Carolina in this matchup is 145-117 all time. In Durham, they are 51-56, including being 40-47 over in Cameron Indoor Stadium. Despite having a losing record, the 40 wins in Cameron are the most by a visiting opponent. Hubert Davis is 4-3 all-time against Duke, and believe it or not, is 2-1 in Durham, having won there his first and his third years. And the big storyline, I think, for a player around this matchup is R.J. Davis is seeking his fourth win at Duke during his Carolina career. That, of course, would tie Tyler Hansbrough, Danny Green, Bobby Frazier for the most all-time. If you go back, buddy, to when we did an edition of the pod back in the offseason, and we talked about the most anticipated games, we knew the Duke game would be at the top because it's the Duke game. It's the biggest matchup of the year. It's the unofficial kickoff to the tip-off, if you will, to the start of the college basketball season. But when I looked at the game at Duke, I specifically pointed out that what was on the line for RJ, which was if Carolina goes into that building and wins, he'll finish his career 4-1 there. No, it's not the 4-0 mark that Hansborough and those guys were back in the mid-2000s, but he would be 4-1, would tie that mark, and it would be something that would add to his legacy as a Carolina basketball player. We know this season has not gone the way that he would have hoped for him individually, let alone the team collectively. But he's played well the last 3 games. Averaging over 19 points per game. He's shooting 50% from the field, and the 3-point shot is becoming it's coming to him a lot easier than what it did the first 2.5 months of the year or so. So when you look at this game from RJ's perspective, considering where the team is, where the program is, do you think a win would still have the same positive impact we thought it would have back in the offseason when talking about his legacy once his time as a Carolina basketball player comes to an end if he picks up a 4th win over in Cameron Indoor Stadium?
I mean, honestly, it might be better. It might do more for his legacy than we thought. You would talk about putting a team that I think a lot of people they're looking at as a team that's on life support and basically giving them a jump start, and all of a sudden putting them in a position where probably a lot of people feel like this team can, once again, make the NCAA tournament, and maybe, close the season strong down the stretch. And I think that is the hope going into this game, is that this is what officially jumpstarts Carolina's season. And I think it has the chance to be. And in order to do that, you're going to need RJ Davis to play the way that he's been playing these last few games. I mean, you mentioned it. Not only is he scoring the ball, because he was scoring the ball earlier in the season, the thing is that he's starting to become more efficient. And that's what you're really looking for. That's when you know that RJ Davis is starting to play the way that we know that he's capable of playing. And so I hope that, this is the sign that we kind of need, that things are starting to turn. And maybe this is the game, because I'm going to tell you, the last, every game that Carolina's played here during this recent stretch, this 4-game stretch where they've lost 3 out of 4, nearly lost to Boston College. I think a lot of people thought that Carolina was going to win every one of those games. I know that Pittsburgh, the ESPN's FPI or BPI, whatever they go off of, they told you that they did not, that Carolina was not favored to win that game. I still think that a lot of people thought Carolina was going to go in there and find a way to come out with a victory. This game, Carolina is going to be given no chance. And I got to be honest, I can't really blame anybody. When Carolina wasn't given a chance during the Final Four back during Hubert's first season, that didn't really make a whole lot of sense, because Carolina had gone in there on senior day and found a way to beat Duke. Some of the other times where Carolina hasn't been given a chance recently in this rivalry, it didn't really make a lot of sense. This one, no, it makes a lot of sense. These are 2 teams heading in completely different directions right now. I mean, Duke looks like one of, if not the best team in college basketball at this time. Carolina looks like a team that is trending towards missing the NCAA tournament for the second time in 3 years. And so I think you kind of wonder if that underdog mentality, sort of takes a little bit of the pressure off Carolina and allows them to play a little free. And if they're going to, you're going to notice it by looking at the play of the 5th-year senior and the leader of this team, RJ Davis.
Yeah, I think this has to be a game where he kind of has to set the tone. He knows as well as anybody that'll suit up on Saturday night how to handle the buildup, how to handle the emotion that really that goes into the game. And we've seen under Hubert Davis, we've seen Carolina come out flat in this rivalry. We've also seen Duke come out flat as well. And I think that's one of the things, because there is so much buildup and hype and anticipation. You got a 2-hour college game day that'll be on campus for Saturday to get you ready for, yes, that game, but, the best Saturday so far of the season. But how you handle the 8 hours that build up to it really plays a factor in the 2 hours that determine it. And yeah, I think you saw last year, man, Carolina with an ACC regular season title on the line, they were the team that threw the first punch. And they were the team that was able to go in there and really set the tone and really control and dictate things. And that's going to have to be the case with this game as well. If Carolina's going to go in there and win, they've got to play a complete 40-minute game. They've got to manage everything from start to finish, and that's all going to be dictated by R.J. Davis, who has to be the best player on the floor for Carolina on Saturday night. And I think if there's a guy that's up to the challenge, I do think it's R.J. I know he has not had the season that he has wanted to have, but he comes out and plays well in the biggest game so far of the year, and that jump starts Carolina towards doing something in March, then I do think it'll make Carolina fans feel positive about him once again. You look at this game from the perspective of Duke. They come in 18-2. They're 10-0 in the ACC. They're second in the AP poll. They have won 14 straight games, have not lost since I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday before Thanksgiving when they lost on a neutral floor to Kansas. They have three players averaging double-figure scoring, led by Cooper Flagg, who has lived up to every bit of the hype upon arriving in as a reclassified five-star freshman. He averages 19.9 points, 8 rebounds, 4.1 assists, shoots 49% from the field, but just 33% from three. Con Knippel, the second leading scorer, 13.1 points, 3.7 rebounds, 2.6 assists. He shoots 43% from the field, 37% from three. And then Tyrese Proctor, the last guy to average double digits, 10.4 points, 3.7 rebounds, 2.2 assists. He shoots 40% from the field, 39% from three. This is a team that the computers and the metrics love. They're third overall in KenPom. They're sixth in adjusted offensive efficiency, averaging 122.9 per 100 possessions. They're third in adjusted defensive efficiency, just giving up 87.6 points per 100 possessions. They are, as a team, allowing 59.6 points per game. That's the fewest of any margin in the conference. And their differential of plus 20.4 is also tops in the ACC. This was a team that entered the season with high hopes. A lot of people expected this team to do what they're doing, which is be the best team in the ACC and be right there in the thick of things to be a favorite to win the national championship. For my book, they're the second best team I've seen all season. I think Auburn is better than they are, even though they beat Auburn back in Cameron back in November. When you look at this Duke team and you look at where they are now and how they've gotten to this point, what stands out the most about what they're going to pose for a challenge for Carolina on Saturday night?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that stand out. I mean, first of all, you've got maybe the best player in all of college basketball. I think, the debate between him and Janai Broome is a fantastic one, but I do think that you look at how good of a player he is. I mean, there's just so many different things that he can do, and he can affect the game in so many different ways, and Carolina is going to have to be prepared for everything that's going to be thrown their way. I mean, you look at how good of an offensive team this team is. I mean, inside of the top 60 in terms of field goal percentage overall, 2-point field goal percentage, and 3-point field goal percentage. I mean, they're a tremendous team. They're a team that's, for Carolina's perimeter defense, they're going to pose a huge challenge because they take 27.7 threes per game, make 10.1 of them, 37th in 3-point attempts, 26th, in 3-point makes. So, I mean, this is one of the toughest tests that Carolina is going to have from that perspective. Really good rebounding team at 40 a game. And then you look at what they are defensively. And I think that's probably the most shocking thing about them. I mean, they allow the 5th lowest shooting percentage of anyone in the country. They allow the 2nd lowest 2-point field goal percentage of anyone in the country. And then what they do, in terms of defending without fouling, I mean, teams are attempting just 14.6 free throws per game against them, which is 17th in the entire country. And so free throw makes at just 10.3 a game is the 11th lowest in the entire country. So, yeah, this is a team that is really good offensively like we expected they would be, we thought, okay, this would be a better team defensively because they are going to have the rim protection. You looked at, Malawach on the inside and what Malik Brown brings defensively. But I don't think we thought that they would be this dominant on both ends of the floor. And so this will be, an interesting test for Carolina because there's so many different things that this team can do that so many teams in this conference can't do. And Carolina's got to be prepared for it all.
Yeah, I think you got to be impressed by the job that John Shire has done this year. This feels like an old school throwback late 90s Duke team where really good defensively. This team competes on that end of the floor as well as any team in recent memory. They've got legitimate size. They have the look and the feel of an NBA team up front. And then offensively, the numbers, I think, are better than the offense that they're playing right now. If you've watched their last two games, the offensive end of the floor has been a struggle for them. And I think that's something that bodes well for Carolina, but you got to be prepared for an offensive eruption at some point because it's not from a lack of talent. It's not from a lack of skill. That team can score the ball. And if Carolina isn't dialed in from the opening tip, that team will score on them left and right. You look at this game from the Carolina perspective, they bring with them that 13-9 record that we've talked so much about here in the last 48 hours or so. They are just 6-4 in the ACC. Away from Chapel Hill, this team has struggled, as that 13-4 record would suggest. 3-4 on the road. The road wins at Hawaii, at Notre Dame, at NC State. The road losses at Kansas, at Louisville, at Wake Forest, and most recently at Pittsburgh earlier this week. Carolina does have 4 players that average double-figure scoring, led by the All-American R.J. Davis, 17.6 points per game, 3.8 rebounds, 4 assists. He's now shooting 40% from the field and 30% from three. Ian Jackson is the second leading scorer, 14.7 points, 3.5 rebounds, 0.9 assists. He's shooting 49% from the field, 38% from three. Seth Trimble, the third leading scorer, 12.3 points, 5.4 rebounds, 1.6 assists, shooting 42% from the field and 29% from the three-point line. And then Elliot Cadeau, the last guy to average double figures, 10.7 points, 3.2 rebounds, 6.1 assists, all while shooting 46% from the field, 28% from three. And in ACC play, Carolina is holding its opponents to 28% shooting from behind the three-point line. That leads the conference. So let's now get to the discussion topics because I have 2 of them for tonight. We know how important this game is. If you're a Carolina or a Duke fan, you wait all year to get to these 2 games. They're the most pressure-packed games. They're the most intense games. They're usually the more nauseating games, even more so than what you deal with when you play in the NCAA tournament, where if you win, you advance. If you lose, you go home. But we can't hide from the fact that with where Carolina is right now on the court, it's impacted the feelings around this game off the court. You look at the jobs that you and I both do. I've had many a Carolina fan tell me point blank, they're not ready for Saturday night. They're not anticipating Saturday night. They're almost ready for it to be over with because they don't think this team is going to be able to go in there and win the game, let alone go in there and compete in the game. Is this the most despondent we've ever seen this fan base when it comes to this matchup? Because even when Carolina had some down years under Roy Williams, when you got to the first matchup against Duke or even the second matchup, if it happened to be in Chapel Hill on your senior night, man, you were able to find a way to get yourself giddy and find a way to believe and put together the path to victory. It feels like for the majority of Carolina fans that we interact with here on the Four Corners podcast or at the station Sports Radio 92.7 WFNZ, that feeling does not exist. Which is really surprising because if you truly believe that this is the greatest rivalry in sports, if you truly believe that when these 2 teams get together, you can throw the record books out, then you would be excited about the possibility of going into that building, into that environment, and coming away with the most significant win of the season.
Yeah, I mean, you just look right here. One of the comments that we had earlier this evening from one of our guys on Twitter, I mean, he says, look, as much as we need this one, I don't have hopes for the Heels. I feel like that's probably where a lot of fans are. And look, honestly, I can't blame you. I don't think anybody can, because this is where this team is at right now, where, yeah, I mean, it's hard to be the guy that thinks that Carolina is going to win this game. But I think, the thing is, to answer the question, yes, most despondent, it's not even close, because I think a few years ago, the thought was that because you had a roster that was as talented as that roster was, they were preseason ranked number 1 for a reason. You still thought in the back of your mind, there is a chance that this team puts together the type of performance that they need to and finds a way to beat Duke on senior night, to beat Duke in the final game with Coach K at home. This one, I got to be honest, I mean, putting together the recipe for Carolina is incredibly difficult, because the way this team has played recently, and to me, I mean, the most damning is the game you didn't even lose. It's the game that you had to go to overtime against Boston College in. That game should have never been into overtime. But first of all, Boston College shouldn't have even been in that game. And yet, for some reason, they were. And so, to me, it's very understandable that Tar Heel fans are where they're at. But the thing that I would say is that if you're looking for a reason to believe that this team can do it, it's because of their head coach. And I know that a lot of people are going to say, what the hell do you mean by that? That doesn't make any sense, because we are so far out on Hubert Davis. Remember that Hubert Davis was in this position in year 1, and it was probably even steeper of a climb in his mind than this game is going to be. Because that game, you had everything in the world working against you. The thing was that all that they talked about was Duke. They were talking about Coach K's final game. They were talking about how good that Duke team was. They didn't really talk about Carolina. Maybe they mentioned the struggles that Carolina was having, how important that game was, but the focus was on Duke and the event that was taking place there that day. There won't be nearly that much on the table, I think, but I will say that the best thing that happened for Carolina is that Duke has stayed undefeated in conference play, that Duke is coming into this game on a 14-game winning streak. Because here's the thing, we've seen it. The last few games, there have been some sloppy things that Duke has done. And if they do that in this game, Carolina is going to have an opportunity to win this one. And I think that Hubert's going to love the fact that his team's not going to be talked about that much. They're going to be focused on Cooper Flagg. They're going to be focused on just the overall talent of this Duke team, the chance that this Duke team has to go deep in the tournament. That's what you're going to hear if you watch game day on Saturday. Those are going to be the talking points. They'll mention that Carolina is struggling. They'll mention that Carolina is on the bubble, because that's important. But their main focus is going to be on Duke. And I think Hubert Davis is going to love that. And I think that's the reason why, if you're still looking for a reason to believe that Carolina can get it done, that's where you can have some solace in the fact that it's been done before. It's been done with even more damning circumstances, some would say. So why can't it be done this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that even though Carolina's season is on life support, there's more pressure building for Duke just for what they could accomplish. Like if Duke gets by this game, they improved 11-0 in the league. 20-0 is definitely on the table for them, which would be an historic achievement. And so I do think, like, in that, John Shire can try to block out the noise as much as possible, but you're going to start hearing that at every turn. I heard Josh Pastner say it earlier this week on the WFNZ airwaves. I think Seth Greenberg has alluded to it, that where if they can get by Carolina, and just because of the rivalry aspect of it, then it's hard to fathom them winning or losing a game in conference play. they're in the running to be the number one overall seed in the tournament. You've got a player that's chasing to be the national player of the year. So there's a lot of stuff that is so much going to be focused on Duke to where Carolina's got to show up and just play basketball. And because there's not a whole lot of positive things being said about them, they got to block out the negativity. But it's not to the same degree as it was when you went in there 4 years ago. But the talk about Carolina going in there and winning does not exist. There's not many people that give them a chance to win. Not even ESPN's BPI gives them a chance to win. That they've only got a 10.4% chance to win the ball game. So it's not easy to believe that Carolina's going to go in there and win with the way that they have played, really over the last 2 weeks. And I get that. But what this rivalry has done over the course of its existence is it brings out the best in both teams. Even when one is having a down year, it typically brings out the best. And when we've seen Carolina play at its best, it's been more than capable of competing with the best teams this sport has to offer, i.e. the close losses to Kansas, Michigan State, and Florida. The Kansas loss on the road, the other two on a neutral floor. The other discussion topic I want to talk about is revolving around the freshmen that exist in this game. Cooper Flagg has lived up to every bit of the hype. He's, in my opinion, the second best player in the country. I think Janai Broome is the best player in the country. But what Flagg is doing as a freshman is going to garner more attention, especially for the program that he plays for. Ian Jackson has cooled off in the last week and a half or so. But you look at his numbers, he's averaging 15 points per game, shooting nearly 50% from the field, and nearly 40% from behind the three-point line. I was trying to think back quickly in my head, when was the last time that Carolina had a freshman that could match or go toe-to-toe with one of the freshmen that Duke have? And I think it's the 2019 season with Kobe White. I think that's what comes to mind. Carolina swept Duke that year. You have the play in Chapel Hill where Kobe dribbled literally through three players and laid the ball up. Is that where your mind goes for Carolina? Because Carolina's done things differently. They typically recruit 3 to 4 year players, and they build for a 2 to 3 year run with those guys. Duke, their roster has changed over every year now for basically going on 15 years. I know Caleb Love came in as a 5-star freshman, had a big game in Cameron as a rookie, had 25 and 7. But does your mind go back to the Kobe White year as the last time Carolina had a legitimate star freshman that could go bucket to bucket with one of the best youngsters that Duke will have out there on the floor in this rivalry matchup?
Yeah, that would probably be the last time. And I mean, you go back to that game. I mean, you remember that, or those games. I mean, you remember that Nazir Little was also there for Carolina as well. In terms of Duke, I mean, they had some special freshmen that year as well. I mean, you got to think that was the Zion year, as well as RJ Barrett, Cam Reddish, Trey Jones. I mean, those rosters were loaded. And that is probably the last time that I remember this type of group of freshmen. Because, I mean, it's not just Cooper Flagg for Duke. You've got Con Knipple. You've got Malawach as well. Come on, Malawach inside. Those are going to be some great matchups. Now, for Carolina, I mean, look, you've got Drake Powell. I don't know if Drake Powell is going to necessarily be able to go toe for toe with some of those guys. But I mean, look, we have seen, Drake have some special games so far this year. We've seen Con Knipple struggle a little bit in some of those games. So who knows? I do think that the freshmen the freshmen for both sides, they're going to be huge determining factors because they play such big roles for these teams. And so it'll be interesting to see the battle of these guys going back and forth. I think, this is a game where you need Ian Jackson to return to the Ian Jackson that we saw in the early part of conference play. And it's there. I know it is. And this is the type of game that can usually bring it out in you. But it's important that this is the game that you see him sort of return to that type of player, because in order for Carolina to compete, they're going to need it. And for Drake Powell, you just need him to be that guy that can stretch the floor consistently in this game and knock down some shots from the outside, who is that plus defender that you need him to be. I think if you get those types of performances from Carolina, sort of like what we saw in 2019 when Duke was loaded with a bunch of talented freshmen, Carolina's there might not be nearly as many. You might not feel as highly about them coming in as you do about the Duke freshmen, but it should be able it should allow Carolina to compete against them if those guys put together some of their best performances of the season.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's been a few years since Carolina has had freshmen that I think are on the same playing level as what Duke has to offer. And look, Ian Jackson's comments about Duke's small gym, those resurfaced this week. You know, that's going to be a part of what's being hurled his way on the cheer sheets from the Cameron Crazies. The best thing to do is to show up and shut them up and play loud. And I think if there's a guy that, will embrace all of that, it is Ian Jackson, who likes to play with a little bit of with a flair, just like Kobe White did. And he was not afraid to go into Cameron Indoor Stadium and shut the Crazies up. With that, let's go ahead and get into our keys to the game before we pick the game. Want to thank all you guys that are joining us live here on a Thursday night, hanging out while listening to us talk Carolina basketball, getting you ready for the game with Duke on Saturday. The first key to the game, I think, is something that Carolina can actually achieve. And I think they've got to wear Cooper Flagg down. If you go back and watch, if you watch the state game that he played in on Monday night, he was flat out exhausted, under 12, under 8 timeout of the second half, because Duke is so dependent on him. He creates a lot of what they do offensively because part of it is he's just that gifted. He's that good where he can control the game with his scoring, with his passing. You can isolate him and he can score, but you can isolate him and he can control the game as a passer. But there's not a lot of guys on this Duke team that can create. You know, Tyrese Proctor, I don't think has ever really got to the level that everyone thought he was going to get to after his freshman year. Con Knipple is a guy that has had moments, has had flashes, but has not been a takeover guy and hasn't been the guy that, Jonathan Gavoni wrote about back in the preseason where he said he could have been maybe the best shooter in the ACC this year. So if I'm Carolina, I am going to do as much as I can to use multiple defenders on Cooper Flagg. It'd be interesting to see who you start out with him. If you're going with the 4-guard lineup, I'd imagine you put Seth Trimble on him just because he's your best defender. I would imagine you're going to see some Drake Powell. This could be a big spot for Jalen Withers just to use his size, his physicality to try to wear him down. But if I'm Carolina, man, my goal is to respect his game, understand how good he is, and understand that he's more than capable of beating you. But I think if Carolina can wear him down, and force the other guys to beat them, the other guys have proven, man, you look at those shooting numbers, there's nothing to brag about. They don't shoot the ball all that well from the outside. I think it could help really Carolina muck the game up, make it more ugly than we're used to seeing a Carolina Duke game, and really try to beat them with their defense because scoring has not been the name of the game for this Duke team over the last week and a half in conference play.
Yeah, they're a team that's starting to look like they are shouldering the load of the fact that they are on the winning streak that they're on. They look like a team that's getting towards the midpoint of conference play that is starting to wear down just a little bit. And so, I mean, look, man, I think taking Cooper Flagg completely out of the game is going to be an extremely difficult task, but you've got to find a way to limit him. And I think wear down is probably the perfect way. If he gets off to a hot start in the first half, that's fine. But you've got to make it where in the second half, somebody else is beating you. Now, I will say this. That does not mean that you let those other guys beat you because we've seen that happen in a game this season. We said the same thing in the game against Stanford. Do not, take away Maxime Renaud, make someone else beat you. and Jalen Blakes did. You allowed other guys in that game to settle in. So, yes, it's important that there are going to be moments where you're going to want to double Cooper. You're going to want to try to force the ball out of his hands, create some turnovers, stuff like that. But you've got to be incredibly smart about how you do it, because you cannot have situations where you let guys settle into the game like you've done so often this year. And once you let these guys settle in and they get hot, it's really difficult to cool those guys off. So I think that's the important thing. Yes, you don't want to let Cooper Flagg go off and have 30 or, God forbid, 40 points like he did earlier in the season. But at the same time, you don't want to let the other guys hurt you that much and get into a rhythm because you're leaving guys wide open. You shouldn't be that focused on taking away Flagg. So it's going to be a balance, but I do think that you're wanting them to have to find somebody else, because we said it when we were, coming back from Chapel Hill last weekend and you had the game between them and Wake Forest on the phone. You saw at times in that second half when Wake was making their run and Duke's offense went completely cold, it's because they don't have that secondary scorer. That person isn't there consistently enough. They have guys that are capable of doing that, but is this one of those scenarios where it doesn't show up because there is some pressure on the Duke freshman the first time in the rivalry? I think that could certainly happen. So I think there is a game plan there for Carolina, but they've got to execute it correctly.
All right, the second key to the game for me is Carolina has to defend the three-point line. And it's really just because the volume of threes that Duke is going to throw up. They're not a great shooting team for percentage-wise, but they shoot a lot of them. And you got to be aware of that. You got to be and you've got to acknowledge that, which means you've got to make sure that you're closing out on these shooters, make sure that your rotations are as crisp and as tight as they've been. And then Carolina's got to be mindful in the pick and roll game. Man, you can't go under screens. You've got to fight over them and try to take away that shooting space, because they do have capable shooters. We've seen Flagg at different times get hot from three. I think the Notre Dame game stands out. We know that Knipple can shoot it, and at some point you would expect him to put the ball in the basket, which with the way that people thought he was going to do upon arriving. And then, we know this game is full of unsung heroes. This could be a game where a Tyrese Proctor or some of those guys, they just get hot from three, and then that could really be the difference in the ball game. Carolina's three-point defense has been the one thing that has not waned, even though this team has struggled in the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, they led the league in three-point shooting percentage at 23%. It's raised, but it's only raised up to 28% shooting from behind the three-point line. And so Carolina's they've got to have that edge. They've got to be mindful of the importance of that, because this building is a lot like Allen Fieldhouse. You make one becomes two becomes three, and then it becomes an avalanche. It snowballs on you, and then they're putting together a run that you just simply can't come back from. So, the defense has been up and down the last 2.5 weeks or so. It's going to have to be at its best, and they got to be mindful that they've got to defend and protect the three-point line as well as they have in any game all season long.
Yeah, and that comes with, again, what I talked about with Cooper Flagg, but just in general, you got to be strategic with how you double. You've got to, as you've pointed out so many times, when you're doubling, you're supposed to be doubling to take away passing lanes as well. Not only are you putting pressure on the ball, but you're trying to make it to where it's not easy to get the ball out, where you can create turnovers when guys are trying to force things because of how well you are doubling. So that's what Carolina's got to be careful with in this game. Is we've seen them, they hedge a lot of stuff, and it creates a lot of these easy looks from the outside when the ball starts to move around. Carolina's got to be careful of that in this game, because there are a lot of different guys that can make shots for Duke. And yeah, if a guy settles in and gets hot, how are you going to slow him down? That's the problem. We've seen that Carolina, when guys start to play, above the numbers on the back of their baseball card, as some like to say. I mean, look, that's when Carolina gets into a little bit of trouble. And so they've got to prevent that from happening in this game. But that comes with just everybody defending at a high level. That's where the intensity has to be at first and foremost. Yes, offensively, you want to see Carolina do some of the things that we've seen them do in recent games, primarily what you saw in that game against Boston College. But in order to win this game, it's going to start on the defensive end of the floor. And so everybody's got to take care of their assignment. You talked about it, man. You said it. Guys have to be aggressive fighting over ball screens, and you can't switch everything because Carolina's tried that strategy and it hasn't worked. It's put them in a load of trouble. Carolina's tried the thing of, oh yeah, we'll go under screens. Can't happen. It's got to be fighting over screens, putting pressure on the ball, and making Duke find a way to just outshoot you. If you're defending your rear end off and they're still finding ways to score the ball, there's simply nothing that you can do. We've seen to a certain extent that was part of the issue against Boston College, was that some guys were just knocking down shots that they haven't knocked down all year long, despite you playing good defense. But it's got to be a good defensive effort from Carolina for us to say, okay, we're just excusing this as a night that Duke got hot and Carolina couldn't find a way to slow them down. I think they're capable of doing it because we've seen it. You go back to that early portion of conference play where Carolina was playing so well defensively. The one game I go back to the most is that SMU game. That was a team that came in shooting the ball pretty damn well, and Carolina found a way to slow them down. They need to bring that type of intensity, that type of confidence to this game if they want to win. And by the way, Hubert Davis, do not be afraid to extend that pressure. Do not be afraid to run that full court press, because this is the type of game where if you chose not to run it for most of the year because you were saving it to run a lot during this game, then it makes a little bit of sense. This needs to be one of those games where you use it as often as possible, especially if they are in the midst of a run, to sort of take them out of it.
All right, let's get to the last keys I have for the game. And there's some other stuff we'll talk about really quick before we get out of here, because we focus so much defensively. But I think that's where this game's going to be won. On offense, Carolina's got to limit the live ball turnovers. It literally cost them the game the other night. They committed 14 turnovers that led to 22 points. They got outscored by 18 off turnovers. If Carolina would have simply protected the ball, they win. In that environment, in that building, with all that energy, turnovers are a death, like they're a death wish. It's hard to commit live ball turnovers and come away feeling happy after the end of the game. It really starts with Elliot Cadeau setting the tone and understanding what he can and cannot do. They've got a lot of size. They've got a lot of length. You can't just lob the ball. Like, you've got to be intentional with your passes. You've got to be strong with your passes. You cannot over dribble. You've got to move the basketball. You've got to make this defense move. You've got to make them chase. You've got to make them rotate. And on the other end, you have got to make sure that you limit your fouls. I don't know how deep Carolina is going to be. Jalen Washington was expected to practice today. That's what Hubert Davis said when he met with the media before practice. The team did not practice yesterday. I would imagine that the travel coming home from Pittsburgh, I guess, played a factor in that. 13-9, 6-4 in the conference. You better play well on Saturday if you're not going to practice as much as you can going into the game. But we've seen, we saw what happened tonight with Elliot Cadeau in those fouls. Granted, Hubert Davis might have to be a little bit more lenient about how much he lets him play when he's got 2 or 3 fouls in the game. But, you don't want a situation where Elliot Cadeau's on the bench. You don't want a situation where Kay Tyson is having to play extended minutes because the environment.
Play. I don't want him on the floor. He better not step foot on the floor in this entire game.
Yeah, because the environment alone might overwhelm him. So I look at those two things and say, as much as anything, like, yeah, Carolina's got to compete on the glass. They've got to not get overwhelmed by Carolina's size. I think they're a much better rebounding team, or Duke's size, or a much better rebounding team, I think, with Seth Trimble back in the starting lineup. I get that. And Carolina's got to make shots, and they got to play well offensively. But to me, it comes down to the defensive end of the floor and these other things that really just get magnified in a game like this. Like, if Carolina turns the ball over 12-plus times, I don't know if they can win the game. If they put Duke at the foul line 20-plus times, 25-plus times, I don't know if they can win the ball game. And so those are two areas where they've got to be intentional about what they're doing. Be strong with the ball, be confident with the ball. And on the other end, don't commit silly fouls, don't commit stupid fouls, and don't send Duke to the foul line more often than they should be there.
Yeah, I mean, this really just points straight at Elliot Cadeau more than anybody. This is a game where he has to be disciplined, because we've seen it at times. He gets a little out of control because he's trying to make the fancy pass, ends up turning the ball over. And we've seen that, he is uber aggressive at times. There are times off of turnovers he's picking up fouls, but especially on that defensive end of the floor, he's picked up silly fouls at times. You've got to avoid that in this game. And look, it's not the end of the world if RJ Davis has to run this team offensively, but we saw that, with the ball in his hands, sometimes that really slows down the offense in the half court for Carolina. So hopefully, Elliot Cadeau can keep himself out there as much as possible, especially since he's been playing better offensively. Like, that's the thing is, yeah, he's had some turnovers. He's committed the fouls, but when he's been on the floor, he has been playing much better offensively in the last couple of games. You're hoping that continues in this game, but in order to see that, he's going to have to be out there. Turnovers from the whole team. I mean, yeah, again, it's not just him that's turning the ball over. Vin Allen Lubin had 4 turnovers the other night. You're going to play a big role in this game. You're a guy that's been around. I mean, I get it, junior, third school. So it seems like he's still a young prospect, but he's not. He's a guy that's an upperclassman. The most important guy is RJ Davis. We've talked about it. Him and Elliot Cadeau trying to split double teams way, way, way too often, and it leads to them turning the ball over. You've got to be smart with the ball in your hands. And here's the thing. You can't dribble the ball as much as they have here recently. That's led to a lot of the turnovers. At some point, you've got to move the basketball. And guys, late in the game, it is possible that the ball can change sides of the court. I know you don't think it is because you want to keep it on the one side for some reason. You can actually pass over to the other side and move the ball around the perimeter a little bit. It does help just a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see what the approach is offensively and how they can limit those turnovers. But also, I mean, getting back on defense is going to be important as well. You're a team that is known for being able to run the floor. And I get it. Not all of those points off turnovers are coming off of teams just running down the floor and scoring. But Carolina's got to get back defensively, and they've got to find ways to get stops when they do turn the ball over. It's going to happen. You've got an aggressive point guard. But I do think that when it does happen, you've got to be able to limit the impact that it does end up having. And you've got to take advantage when the other team is turning the ball over on the other end. This is a game where, once again, third straight opponent that does a really good job of taking care of the basketball. But when they do turn it over, you have to be able to take advantage. So I think the turnover battle in this game, we talk about it so much whenever we talk about football, but in this game, I think it is very important for Carolina to win that turnover battle. Even if they don't necessarily win in the number of turnovers, they have to win in the points off of turnovers, because that will be the difference in this game.
All right, yeah, I wanted to talk about some offensive stuff really quickly. Greg Ward commented, said we have to hit 9+ threes, don't turn it over, and we have to get to the line. I don't know. 9 threes, I feel like, is asking too much of this team. I think 7 is a good sweet spot. That's 21 points. If I got the math correct. I think RJ is starting to find it. It's starting to come to him. I think He's shooting with a lot more confidence. I think this is where you need Ian Jackson to be what Ian Jackson was at the beginning of conference play, where he was scoring 20-plus points every time out and was making at least 2 to 3 three-pointers a game. Because if he can shoot the ball well from the outside, it's going to make them account for him even more so. And it should open up driving lanes for Seth, RJ, and Ellie to really get to the rim. I think free throws are going to be huge. And I think the mindset's got to be, we're going to attack that rim. We're going to attack that size. They can't be intimidated by it. They can't be overwhelmed by it. They've got to attack it. Because the thing about size is that it comes with a lack of – it does come with a lack of speed. Like, yes, Duke is athletic, but if you get that size out there, you get those big old galoots out there on the perimeter, you should be able to drive right by them and get to the rim and either finish or draw fouls. And so this cannot be a game where Carolina shoots 10 free throws. This cannot be a game where Carolina shoots 15 free throws. No, that has to be relentless. It has to be constant rim pressure from the opening tip, because I think Carolina can drive this Duke team. I really do. They've got to shoot, I would say, 20-plus free throws and hit about 7 threes offensively to really put themselves in a really good spot. Typically, this game is high scoring. Typically, this game is free-flowing and it's up and down. It brings out the best in both teams, and it's usually the purest form of basketball that you see be played in the regular season. With that being said, to me, if Carolina's going to win this game, this is going to be a rock fight. It's going to be a dog fight. It's going to be a game played maybe in the upper 60s. More than likely, it's going to be played in the lower 70s. Possessions are going to matter, so Carolina's got to make sure that they capitalize on them, hit the timely threes that they need to hit, and get to the foul line and try to score with that clock stopped.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be difficult, man, because this is a team that does not put other teams at the foul line very often. So Carolina's got to be incredibly aggressive. They're probably going to be one of the more aggressive teams at trying to get to the basket that Duke has seen all season long. And the thing is that you've got to do it for the entirety of the game. We've seen that this team, I mean, you saw it the other night in the game against Pittsburgh. They stopped doing the things that they needed to be able to get to the basket. That high screen action that we've seen, didn't do it. They did not attempt to do that the entire second half, it almost felt like. And I think that really changed the game, and it really created a very stagnant look on the offensive end of the floor. They've got to be able to do that in this game if they're going to find a way to win, because that's going to free you up to be able to get to the basket and potentially draw some of those fouls that put you at the line. For me, I'm kind of with Greg. I'm with our guy. I think you've got to hit 9, maybe more threes than that in this game. The thing that I want people to understand is that the recipe that we're laying out for Carolina to win, it is not going to be easy. This is one of the best teams in the country for a reason. So in order for Carolina to win, they are going to have to play one of, if not their best game of the entire season. And so with that comes making shots. And look, RJ has started to settle into a little bit of a groove. We know that when Ian Jackson is cooking, Ian Jackson can knock shots down from the outside. We know that Seth Trimble has had his moments where he's hit some big threes for Carolina on the perimeter. I get it. His shot has not really looked the same since he's come back from the injury that cost him 3 games. But still, this is a game where you're hoping that shot starts to connect. Maybe Elliot Cadeau gives you a shot or 2 from the outside that he ends up making. Drake Powell, we've seen he's capable of it. Somehow, to me, I think Carolina's got to find their way. That 9 mark feels pretty good. If they could get to that double-digit mark, I think you're in a really, really good spot, because the way that this team plays, especially down the stretch when they're playing their 4-guard lineup, you've got to be able to make shots, and you've got to be able to make shots from the outside if you're not creating a lane to the basket when you're playing isolation basketball. So I think it's going to be difficult, But I think that is the recipe for success for Carolina on the offensive end of the floor. And look, if there's a game where it can be done, it's this type of game, because we have seen in this rivalry matchup that this brings out the best in certain players. I think it is certainly possible that you could see that from Carolina in this game, and you're going to need it in those particular areas.
All right, it's time to make our predictions for Saturday night. As I mentioned earlier in the program, Carolina, just a 10.4% chance to win the game, according to ESPN's matchup predictor. You always get to go first. Who wins the game and why?
Ooh, well, look, I think that Carolina, everything tells you that Carolina is not going to win this game. You know our rule on this podcast, really, across the two podcasts. There are teams that we don't predict they will win the game. It just doesn't happen. So you, of course, know the way that I'm leaning. But here's the thing. There is a way that this can work out for Carolina, because there is a level of desperation that you can bring to this game that is not going to be matched by the talent that Duke has. Carolina is as desperate as any team right now, maybe in the entire country, because it feels like their tournament hopes above anybody else's are on the line here. There are people that say they need to win this specific game to have any chance of making the tournament. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I do think they know how important this is. And this feels a lot like that first year under Hubert Davis, where nobody is going to be talking about Carolina. Everybody's going to be focused on Duke. We know Duke's going to win this game. There's a chance this is a blowout. There's a chance Carolina doesn't even show up for the second half of this game. That's the motivation that these guys have to take going into this one. And look, I know the speech that Hubert gave after Boston College didn't show up in its entirety in the game against Pittsburgh. There's still a chance that you can look back on that speech and pull from it for this game to get a little bit of extra motivation and say, this is where our season turns around. Because you can make the case that, hey, if you had beaten Pittsburgh, would that potentially turn the season around? Yeah, maybe. But if you then had followed it up with a loss to Duke, that could have taken the steam out of the sails once again. If you win this game, there is nothing that is taking the wind out of the sails. There's nothing. It doesn't matter what ends up happening in these next couple of games. This one would mean everything. I think Carolina knows that going into this game. I think the pressure of being on a 14-game winning streak, the pressure of winning 10 straight to begin conference play and staring down a possible 20-0 season in the ACC will get to Duke, and I think Carolina finds a way to do it. It's going to be ugly. You're going to want to pull your hair out. You may punch yourself in the face at some point in this game because you'll ask yourself, why the hell am I putting myself through this? But I think Carolina finds a way to get the win and turn their season back in the right direction.
You come to Carolina to play in this game. As much as going to the Final Four, as much as winning national championships determines legacies and narratives, how you perform in this game goes a long way. And it's something that Jay Billis, I think, has talked about in the last couple of years, because with the way that the rivalry has evolved, where you've got so many one-and-dones or transfer guys, how you perform matters. Think about how we think about Cormac Ryan, a guy that underperformed from a shooting perspective just a year ago, but scored 30-plus points on the road in that building and helped Carolina win an ACC regular season title, and we'll forever love him. He's one of us. He's a Tar Heel based off of really one game. That's what this game offers. I look at what's presented for Carolina. I look at what's presented for RJ Davis. You go in there and you win. You get a win that keeps you in NCAA tournament conversations and could propel you to the type of finish that you need to have to make sure you hear your name called come Selection Sunday. for RJ Davis, it gives him 4 wins in that environment. Something that he could look back on and say, this is what I achieved as a guy that played 5 years of basketball at the University of North Carolina. This game means more to Carolina than it means to Duke. And that's why Carolina has favored so well in the rivalry. Not just because they've been on the bubble more often than not, but because they've had guys that have had sweat equity in this for a handful of years. They know how to handle the build-up. They know how to handle the emotion. They know how to handle the first 4 minutes of the game, which a lot of times it's just getting that first media timeout so you can breathe. And then from there, it's just playing basketball. I think Carolina knows that they can win. I think they know that they're capable of winning. As much pressure is on them from our perspective, there's more pressure on Duke to beat us. There's more pressure on Duke to probably run us out of the gym and really cement themselves as the best team in the country and as a team that's capable of going 20-0 in ACC play, something that would be historic. I think Carolina's up to the challenge. I think RJ Davis is up to the challenge. I think this team doesn't play its best game, but it plays its hardest. It plays its most complete game of the year. And we've seen this team play hard for 36 minutes and fall short. We've seen this team play hard for 38 minutes and fall short. When this team has played 40 minutes, we've seen what they're capable of doing. When they play 40 minutes, they can play and beat anybody in the country. I think they play 40 minutes on Saturday. And I think they pull off yet another shocker in Cameron under Hubert to get a win that makes us all just feel a little bit better about ourselves going into the final month and a half of the year. I think Carolina wins, and I think we have a week off to kind of just celebrate, rejoice, and really bask in the glory of ruining another chance at history for this Duke team. And right now, that's what this team is chasing. They're chasing history. And I think Carolina will go in there and wipe away all that talk. It wouldn't be as sweet as it was 4 years ago, but it would feel just as similar because nobody, and I mean nobody, is giving this team a chance to go in there and win. I think Carolina does so, and I think we have a fun recap pod on Saturday night. No matter what happens, we'll have you covered on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Full coverage will be provided to you on Saturday. The preview of the game will go up the day of the game, and, of course, the recap will come after the game as well as I continue to take you through the basketball season. Any news and notes that come out of the Keenan Football Center, big weekend recruiting for Carolina as well. You know, Anthony will have you covered as long with anything that comes out with some of the NFL draft stuff that's going on this week at the Shrine Bowl and down at Mobile, Alabama with the Senior Bowl. So make sure you're visiting our website every single day. That's HeelToughBlog.com for the latest and the best Carolina basketball, Tar Heel football coverage. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast. We'll pop up there. We encourage you guys rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the basketball season. We'll be back live on these same platforms Saturday night, recapping the action, whether it's a win or a loss. So make sure you're familiar with the Heel Tough Blog Facebook page, the YouTube channel, or me on Twitter at HTB_Josh. We'll be back here recapping all things that happen on Saturday night over in Durham. With that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels and go to hell Duke.